Good afternoon. I'm Charlie Saffro, and I am today's co-host of the LLC podcast. So it's an honor to have everyone on the show to introduce these listeners to some inspiring women who are making a big difference in the logistics and supply chain industry. On today's podcast, we're going to talk about some inspirational stories, both personal and professional, that Kara has overcome. We're going to discuss Kara's background and how that helped shape her today. And then also how women empower others, how they give back to their communities, how they lead by example and share their advice with the world. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Kara Smith-Brown, our guest today. I'll give a quick bio on Kara, and then I'll let her fill us in a little more on her journey. So Kara and I have known each other for a long time, and today she is the CEO at LeadCoverage. It is a B2B demand generation, sales, and PR consultancy that specializes in our industry of supply chain, also heavy industrial and technology industries. Kara was one of the first employees at SEKO Global Logistics, believe it or not. Her name is actually in the 2009 IPO press release. And Kara then went on to work for OHL, which is now Geodis. She's also worked for SEKO. She's an active force in cultivating Atlanta's female economy, a co-founder of CloseHer, which is a community for women in sales, a board member at Launchpad 2X, and is also an Entrepreneur Organization Atlanta chapter board member. So, Kara, thank you so much for being here. Such a pleasure to have you on the show. And I know that today we're going to have a dynamic conversation. I will learn a lot, and I'm really excited for our listeners to also hear from you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for the intro. I don't know what else you need to know about me. And it feels like I do a lot from that intro.
Yeah, you sound
doesn't
like
feel like I do that much, but when you say it out loud, it sounds like there's a lot going on.
Busy woman. Give yourself some props there. So, Kara, I'd love for you to just tell us in your own words a little bit about your background. Obviously, I just skimmed through your resume, but tell us about your journey, kind of where you started, and I'd love for you to take us to where you are today.
Yeah, happy to. So one of my favorite things to do when I meet another woman in supply chain is to ask her exactly this question. How did you end up in supply chain?
Exactly.
Very few of us were in our sorority house, thinking, man, I can't wait to work in trucks, right? It probably wasn't ever, maybe it was someone's dream, but it wasn't mine necessarily. Yeah, exactly. So in 2006, like you mentioned, I was actually the 12th employee at SEKO Global Logistics. Funny story, I was hired before Doug Wagner. Which is really interesting. And so we grew 3,000% in 3 years. And I got to do their IPO, which was an absolutely phenomenal experience. And we also actually got to send the first Groupon email. So Eric Kokoski and Brad Keywell, who were the founders and original owners of SEKO, also started Groupon. And one of the guys that sat like 2 cubes down from me came by one day and he's like, green or blue? And I was like, well, if you're going to call it Groupon, go with green. And so we literally sent the first Groupon email, which was super fun. So the 600 West entrepreneurial ecosystem is where I sort of cut my teeth, had a great time, met some really amazing people that are still in my network today. Well, post IPO, I went to SEKO for a minute, and then I got picked up by what was at the time OHL, Osborne Hesse Logistics in Tennessee. We were supposed to do an IPO, and they were like, come to Nashville and help us get this thing started. They were into a private equity deal. Long story short, that didn't happen. So I called my husband, who is a nuclear engineer fitness model. Pause for effect. Yep, great story about how I closed that deal.
And another conversation.
Yeah, actually, it's actually part of the story. It's really funny. So I called my husband and I was like, hey, so all my bosses just got fired. Something really is funky going on here. This probably is going to be the right spot. What should we do next? And he said, well, let's go home to Chicago and make some babies, which was great timing. So we went back to Chicago, popped out two kids, started working on an MBA and sort of sending emails for friends. So like most overachieving women, I was like, oh, I'll have 2 babies, get an MBA, and I'll just start this side hustle, right? Which was like basically sending emails for friends in my basement in my pajamas. And so that became a real business, which was unexpected. Ended up working for a couple of my friends out of the 600 West environment, started closing deals in supply chain because this is sort of my network, had come out of SEKO, and moved to Atlanta for a garbage brokerage, which is a crazy story. So a friend of mine from Echo called and he said, hey, I'm in Atlanta doing this garbage brokerage. Why don't you move down here? And I was like, garbage? He's like, yeah, we took a freight broker public in our 20s. Let's take a garbage broker public in our 30s. I was like, oh, actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Spoiler, garbage is nothing like freight. Very different, not at all the same, super different, but it was really fun, learned a lot. And we raised $95 million in capital for that company.
Wow.
So I'm in Atlanta, moved from Chicago to Atlanta, fell in love with this city. Very, very happy down here. My husband got a great job. The kids got into a free school and I'm like, cool, I'm never going back. What do you do next? I learned the statistic that less than 2% of female founders will ever break $1 million in revenue.
So
it's
sad.
actually, yeah, it's so sad. It's 1.7%. It's a American Express number. And I was like, oh, well, that's not that hard. Like, okay, hold my beer, right? So we did that. We did that in 10 months with an all-female team. And we're sort of on the path to 10. We can see 10 million in revenue. The number of women that make it to 10 is less of a rounding error than the 1.7 that make it to 1. They don't even track it. It's not even trackable.
Wow.
And those that make it without outside funding. So bootstrapped only, right? No VC, no rich uncle, et cetera. So that's the path we're on. The business, very specifically, we do B2B lead gen, which for us means anything analyst relations, public relations, anything in the marketing funnel. So Pardot, Salesforce, HubSpot, et cetera. We're also an intent data partner with Demandbase. We do a lot of stuff with intent. And then when it comes to the bottom of the funnel, in the thick of the pandemic, we put 26 sales reps back to work. So we had always sort of said, hey, Charlie, here's the 14 people that came to the webinar. Here's the 25 folks that you met at this trade show. You should go call them. They're warmed up. And inevitably, they wouldn't get called. You know, it is what it is. And so we started making the first dial and it worked like a charm. So we basically do the entire marketing funnel from pay-per-click and SEO and all the things you need to be successful online, all the way through the first dial. And then we measure all that using volume, velocity, and value. So yeah, it's kind of cool.
Wow, that is very cool.
Yeah.
And I love our stories are actually very similar. And I know we chatted about this, but it took both of us having kids and kind of trying to figure out what we want to do. But I was the same way. I was sitting in my pajamas, feeding a baby in the middle of the night and looking at resumes and connecting with people. And before I knew it, I had a business and I found myself in this crazy but amazing industry. So one question I have for you, Kara, is from a marketing standpoint, have you always been in marketing within this industry, or going back to your time at Echo, what was your function there and how did you transition into this world of marketing?
Yeah, no, I was always the marketing girl. The job before Echo, I worked for this very sexy company called Smith Buckland. It was a association management. This is the first job out of school. So I went to the University of Illinois, Big Ten school. I'm a very average girl from Schaumburg, Illinois, right? Went to U of I, just like everyone else in Chicago. And I graduated and they were hiring groups like 30 at a time of 21-year-old liberal arts grads from Big Ten. This is who Smith Buckland hired. And so I get in and I'm on the team that's managing the American Ladder Institute, like ladders to go up to your roof, the Ladder Institute, the American Association of Steel Distributors, and the Wall Coverings Association. I swear to God, wallpaper.
Very sexy. Yeah.
Very sexy, very sexy. And we did like big trade shows and annual meetings and a lot of admin work that made sense for a bunch of 20-something women, right? So we didn't make a lot of money, but this is actually really funny. I was responsible for like ticket sales for something, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember that I was so bad at the math. Like I was putting the numbers in wrong, and you had to like type these checks in, and my mom is a CPA, and so I actually literally had my mom come to my office and help me figure out what I had done so terribly wrong.
That's amazing.
I swear to God. So the company was like, listen, we like you. You've got great hustle. We think you're awesome. We love your attitude. But you can't be on like around the math anymore. Like we have to find a new place for you. Spreadsheets. Yeah, exactly. No more spreadsheets. And there was a spot in marketing and they moved me down to marketing and sort of cut my chops on how to do like, I don't know, like regular like design edits. So like how to do editing things, how to not write. Actually, this is we still use this. No prepositional phrases. which is something that I use to this day. This is like super granular and like super marketing nerdy, so apologies in advance. But a prepositional phrase will always make your language a passive voice. So if you find a preposition and there's always a better way to write the sentence. Rewrite the sentence with no preposition and it immediately becomes active voice. It's crazy.
Give us an example.
Oh my gosh, I knew you were going to ask me that. So Charlie and I are going to the store to get new Spanx. I don't know why that came to my mind, but it did. Okay, so instead of to get new Spanx, Charlie and I are going Spanx shopping.
I like that.
And this is very this is very grammar girl, but this is so Smith Buckland, was where I sort of cut my chops on this like very technical, very granular marketing stuff.
A lot of technology too.
Yeah, it was super, super weird. And then I had booked freight in college. And I don't even know how it happened now. It was a long time ago, 20 years ago. I got the job with SEKO because I had literally booked trucks in college for the final mile delivery center for Expo Home Depot stores. And I was writing marketing copy. And they were like, all right, so you know something about trucks, and you know how to write marketing copy. Do you want to come work for us? And I was like, sure. So my dad said to me, you should take this job at this startup because you're 24 or whatever I was. It's going to fail because all startups fail, but like you should go try it and like it'll be fun and you'll learn something new. So 3 years later, I call my dad and I'm like, hey, so my boss came by and asked me if I wanted to help with this thing called an S1 and like an IPO and Reg FD. Like, this is good, right? Like he's like, yeah, this is good. Like, good job. Way to pick them.
Always got to tap into the dad for that advice.
Yeah, exactly.
Validation. I love it.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I've always sort of been in marketing. I definitely have found myself now in marketing and sales because when you become an entrepreneur, you are all sales all the time. But the marketing piece, I've always found it super fascinating. The other thing about marketing that I really like is the speed at which it changes is phenomenal, right? So the democratization of tools like HubSpot and ActiveCampaign and these amazing things that we can do now with technology, and like we can see where your customers are searching to answer questions and to solve problems before you even know that they're interested in your solution. You can see that they're interested in some solution. Like, I just think the future of marketing technology is really, really cool.
And I think we all can relate to that just with like Instagram ads or Facebook ads. Like, are they listening to me or how do they know what my next step was going to be? So
for sure.
Yeah. And I love to see it in this industry. And I think what's most interesting is I've recruited in this industry for about 15 years, owned my own firm for about 12. And we have worked, I can count the number of true marketing roles that we worked on with 3PLs, with asset providers, up until about 2 years ago. And it really has gotten a lot of attention in the industry. And attention generally comes from budget. So what I'm excited about is I'm starting to see companies allocate a budget, understand that this is an investment and that they need a subject matter expert in-house, partially to keep up with the competition, but also obviously to scale, to grow, and to be able to provide the right solutions to their audience. And I also come from a marketing background. So for me, it's really fun to see these job descriptions and think about how it applies to our industry. However, I do think that there is a lot of confusion or maybe a gray area when you start to talk about marketing and sales. And you've started to mention that. So in the past, we would take on sales searches and, oh yeah, that person's also going to develop a marketing campaign. Well, what does that actually mean? Are they just sending a drip email campaign, or is that a cold calling strategy, or are they actually designing a billboard for a highway? Talk to us a little bit about, in your mind, how you separate or combine the two and kind of what those different paths might look like for a position or someone's career.
Oh man, I wish I had my graphic I could show you. I'll answer your first question pretty easily because we think about this all the time. Marketing's job is to serve sales.
Serve sales.
Serve sales. Like from our perspective, marketing's job is to serve sales, and marketing and sales should really be one team. There really shouldn't be in our sort of perfect world. There's no difference between the marketing team that is identifying your total addressable market, pulling lists from ZoomInfo, pulling lists from Sales Intel, qualifying, identifying, especially with intent data now. Like your marketing team should have really solid intel about who's in your existing CRM, who should you go acquire, what's happening at the next trade show. And I believe that it's marketing's job to also look out into the industry. So especially your CMO, which is really, really hard in our space because there just aren't enough quality senior level marketing people to actually do true CMO work. When I say true CMO work, I mean, we have identified that there is a very specific number of turns in the TMS market. It is less than 100. Right. And we know this because we do this for clients all the time. And so we know that there are less than 100 deals on the table every year. So if you're a new TMS or if you're, someone who is trying to disrupt the TMS market, you go and tell your board that your total addressable market is like 12,000 deals. Like the answer is you're just wrong, right? And your marketing person should know that. Like in theory, that should be their job. So they should be informing sales, hey, like you think that our TAM might be all these customers, but it's really only this small segment, right? And here's why. Here's the math. So I think marketing should be math driven, number one. We don't do creative. At my company, LeadCoverage does no creative.
Okay.
And in our space in supply chain, the reason that I say this is like, hey, no one's going to choose, we'll just use Echo. No one's going to choose to use Echo because their logo is the logo. P.S. Very, very proud of that logo. But like, they're not picking Echo because of the logo. They're picking it because of the relationship and the service and how long they've been in business and who they want to work with, et cetera. And can you solve the problem? The key is, can you solve the problem? And so I believe that sales and marketing is one team. We also like to think about sales and marketing as 4 funnels.
Okay.
Right. So everyone thinks of one funnel, but inside the one big funnel, there's 4 funnels. The first one is prospecting. And prospecting is your dirtiest funnel. What I mean by dirty is like, this is where like the dog walker ends up, or the companies that are out of business, or my mother-in-law, God bless her, like they end up in the prospecting funnel and they sort of stay there. We like HubSpot for this because it's cheap and easy to like clean up and it can get kind of dirty. 2 is the nurture funnel. So once you really truly identify someone that they are in your ideal customer profile, they're actually looking for what you're selling, right? Then they get nurtured, right? Okay. Once they get nurtured, then they move into the actual customer flow, right? So marketing should own these 2. They should own top line prospecting and the nurture process. Once they move into the customer or prospect sort of customer process, and this is where sales and marketing sort of converge, then on the other side of the customer process is upsell, cross-sell, right? Which sometimes marketing has responsibility for, but in sort of the new nomenclature of what's coming out in SaaS, sort of we follow the SaaS Martech world, is customer success. Right. So your customer success team is responsible for cross-sell and upsell. So I think that answers your first question of like, how do we think of sales and marketing? Should they be combined, et cetera? And I think your second question, correct me if I'm wrong, is like the people, right? So I'll give you a great example of someone who has done this in an amazing way, and I'm super proud to know him, is Patrick Maley. He was the CMO of Blue Jay when they exited to E2 Open.
Okay.
And Patrick built an account-based marketing engine at Blue Jay that actually delivered material value to the exit of Blue Jay to E2 Open. That's like in our space in supply chain, like that's a unicorn, right? Like that's amazing to have that happen. I would say 9 times out of 10, our space isn't sophisticated enough for that yet. Like they don't necessarily like understand like why you would want to make such a huge investment in the tech and the people and the processes to build that sort of engine. But it was an actual contributor to the multiple upon exit, which I think is super cool. So I think it's coming. I think that we're starting to see the beginning of supply chain being sexy. And we're starting to see people get interested. I think anytime you see venture capital get interested, others will follow.
The light bulb go off,
Yeah, exactly. So we're starting to see some of that interest from folks that have been doing marketing from either SaaS or even CPG or business to consumer B2C stuff. Although the B2C stuff is a lot harder to translate than
Mhm.
like enterprise SaaS sales, if that makes
Sure.
sense.
Sure. No, it does. It does. And, I think that one of the, I'm guessing one of the biggest barriers for you is when you start to talk about ROI. So I want to touch on that subject real quick, just because I know from my days in marketing and even what we do as a firm from a marketing standpoint, that it gets messy. And sometimes we'll run a campaign and like, I know that we don't have the click response or the open rate, but I feel like it worked and we just have to be patient. And, it's that gut feeling like someone will come back to me. Someone forwarded that email and it will pay off. And it does. And I totally believe what goes around comes around. But that has got to be your biggest hurdle when you are trying to close a deal or cross-sell a client. So talk to me a little bit about, I guess, the concerns you hear and the questions you get, but also how do you think of ROI and measuring that in this industry and what you guys are doing?
I love it. So I love that you think that that's the biggest challenge. Like, I'm so grateful for you saying that because it's hardly ever.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, which makes me feel like a total boss. So thanks for
Yeah.
that. It means I do a good enough job when I'm selling to like get people to understand the value.
Exactly.
We are hyper specific about measuring ROI. So we have a saying in the business. I won't drop any swear words on the podcast today, but we say thank you for your feelings. We have math.
Okay.
And so everything we do is math driven. We can actually prove the ROI of analyst relations, which is super hard to do, because everything we do is driven to ROI. And the reason that we can actually see ROI is because we believe marketing and sales should be one team and that marketing serves sales. So we are not the team that's making a white paper and then walking away, right? We're the team that's making a white paper, working. We'll use an actual example in the real world. So we worked for a robots company. I won't mention the name, but they make robots for warehouses. And we did an analyst relations campaign. So we worked with an analyst shop to build essentially a magic quadrant, but it's not Gartner, right?
Okay.
And we turned this into a leave behind, sort of a sexy white paper. I think it was 2 or 3 in a row. Did a series of white papers, a whole marketing campaign around the whole deal, right? And we could see landed meetings of 18 total, right? They closed 9 of those 18 deals because they were hyper qualified at an ARR of $3 to $10 million a pop.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a result.
So it's real results, and we can track those humans and their interest back to that ROI to that campaign. And so I think it's hard, right? Like measuring anything is hard, but we think about it in 3 ways. We think about measuring volume, velocity, and value.
The 3 V's.
And yeah, 3 V's. So whether that turns into like MAL to SQL or SQL to DocSign, like it doesn't really matter what the nomenclature is of the business. Every business is different. You're really looking for volume, velocity, and value in your prospect and your nurture funnels. That's really it. And if you can figure out what those KPIs that are sort of moving the needle, it's super important. I'll give you sort of one last sort of giveaway, and I'm happy to share this with anyone who wants it.
Sure.
We created a very sexy model, marketing model, not a
That's
human.
it.
Model. Essentially, the inputs are volume, velocity, and value. So the inputs are, what is your conversion ratio? So we think of top of funnel to MQL, SQL to MQL to SQL, SQL to close. So we'll just keep it simple, right? So cold, warm, hot. So if your top of funnel to marketing qualified lead is 20%, and your marketing qualified lead to sales qualified lead is 10%, and you're closing half of those, right? That's one input. The other input is then the value of the deal, which, to be totally honest, Charlie, I'm very surprised that a lot of people don't know the average value of their deal. We're like, but is it 30 grand? Is it 3 million? Is it 30 million? And they're like, well, I don't know. It's somewhere between 60 grand and 3 million. We're like, that's not helpful. So you can have more than one. But once you put these inputs into the model, it'll tell you what is the actual ROI. We gave it a ramp. We gave it a decay analysis. It's very sexy. It's a lot of math. But happy to share it with all the listeners. You're welcome to reach out to me and I'll share it with you. But it's really easy for us to say to our customer, okay, all right, Charlie, you want 5 closed won deals a month. Okay. Your average closed won deal is $100,000. Okay. Your close ratio is only 5%. So we have to put 50,000 leads in the top of your funnel.
Yeah.
Hey, Charlie, that's not going to work, right? So it helps us identify where the gaps are between sales and marketing, which goes back to the two teams being one. Because if you don't know your conversion ratios and you don't know your average deal size, your marketing team is just out there spraying and praying with no understanding of what the actual goal should be.
So a little more focus on quality over quantity. Is that where you're going with that?
I mean, maybe for some clients, let's just think about a truckload spot market broker, right? Volume is the name of the game.
Sure.
Right? How many humans can see my ad or my logo, etc., the minute they need a truckload spot market? Totally different if you're selling hyper customized software packages for a CargoWise integration.
Sure.
Right? Super different. So it really is client dependent or company dependent, but the fundamentals are the same, right? I mean, you do this in your business every day, right? You're recruiting. So how many humans do we have to talk to get to one decent candidate to put 3 people in front of our client that they choose?
You got it.
You know it. I mean, like, so, hey, like,
numbers, but that's exactly what it is. And it's frustrating when we're dealing with humans because it should be a quality game. And that is where our ultimate focus is. But you can't get to the quality without the quantity. And it becomes a numbers game. And then you can really start to humanize it as you start to get down the funnel, essentially.
Yeah, but you have the same problem in recruiting. I mean, recruiting and marketing are so similar, which is probably why you're so good at it. It's all about identifying your ideal customer profile.
Exactly.
So I'll give you another example. We have a client, all remain nameless, but you walk in the door and they're like, who do you want to reach? Anyone who ships. Okay, well, that's not true. Like, clearly you don't want to touch anyone who ships. Like, small parcel, like truckload, LTL, like reefer, like, come on, like, there's a lot of options here, right? And so the tighter you can get on your ideal customer profile and the tighter you can get on the problems you're solving for that person, which gets into like the sort of squishy part of marketing, which is like language. And I can do a whole podcast just on like how to write decent marketing copy. But at the end of the day, I had a call this morning with a client and she said, Kara, I really don't like these emails. And I was like, okay, like, you can change them to whatever, like, no pride of authorship here. Like, you don't have to use these emails.
Sure.
And after 30 minutes on the phone, she was like, never mind, these emails are perfect. This is great.
After she was educated.
Yeah, because I was like, well, just think about your customer, right? Like, your customer is trying to essentially prove that he's valuable to the board, right? We all know there's a recession coming. And so if you can prove to this CTO or COO of some broker, let's just say, that you're going to give them a technology that is going to help them win or be at the front of the pack in the coming recession, I guarantee you're going to get a phone call.
Exactly.
If you're going to have a conversation about, like, I don't know, the difference between digitize and digitalize, I guarantee you they're going to delete that email. Like, they're not interested. And so I think there's a bunch of factors to marketing, but at the end of the day, if you start with the math, I find that if we start with the math, the ROI question is pretty easy to answer because we're answering it at the front, right? And we're sort of aligning on what those conversion rates are.
And I love where you were going with that because I follow you on LinkedIn and hopefully our listeners will as well. But one thing I've noticed about your content, and I also think this is where just the world is going, is that it's a storytelling format. And that's exactly what you just did there with your client. It's, let's put ourselves in the prospect's shoes. Let's think about what they need to see, what they need to hear to feel that this is the right solution. So I'm assuming storytelling is a big foundation of how you approach the strategy before you start your execution of these campaigns.
Yeah, I hate the word storytelling. Like,
what can we call it?
No, you can call it, it is storytelling. It just, especially in our space. So the reason that we don't go to market as a digital marketing company, which like, let's be honest, we're just digital marketing, right? Is because everyone has a PTSD, like historical relationship with some marketing shop that like didn't know the difference between LTL and LCL, and like then they like left them with like a crappy blog. Like everybody has this issue, right?
We deal with the same thing. It's like you were burned by another recruiter, but so
exactly, you guys deal with the same thing. And so we don't go to market as a branding shop because everyone's been burned by some dude who doesn't know anything about transportation trying to prove it to them. But there is a book that we absolutely love that we use at the beginning of all of our client engagements. It's called Donald Miller's Building a Story Brand. There are literally 8 copies behind me, all of the red books behind me. It's the same book. So in the book, he answers 7 questions. And he basically says every story has an arc, right? And every story has a hero. And the biggest challenge we have is getting our customers to understand that they are not the hero of the story. It is your customer. And it's really hard for people to get out of the sort of beating our own chest. We're so great. Look at my features, right? Like, look at all the things I can do. Look at my logo salad. And remember that you're solving a problem for a human.
That's such an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah. So in the book, Donald Miller, and I won't go through the whole thing, but my favorite part is every person wakes up the hero of their own story every day. So don't compete with that because they don't care about you. They don't care.
Right.
And number 2 is everyone's trying to solve an internal and an external problem. So you, Charlie, solve a very specific internal problem. I cannot do my job without more people, right? So my internal problem is if I don't get more people, I won't be able to close more work, which means I probably won't hit my numbers, which means I might get fired, right? So the real problem you're solving is don't get fired, hire more people, right?
Exactly.
But the external problem is earnings or, time. Like there's a bunch of external and internal problems. When you can solve an internal problem, people buy. But they don't buy external problems. And I should say that. They don't put value on external problems the same way they put value on internal problems, if that makes sense.
It does. And it's a good kind of selfish almost. Like you have to think about how this is going to add value to you, to your company, to your peers before you can look outside. So I like that a lot. And I think that is probably a huge part of everything you're doing is let's get down to the human. It comes from a brand, it comes from a logo, but I think we both know people want to work with people. And so how do you, get to that point where you can expose the humans behind the brand?
And how do you solve that humans problem?
Exactly. Right.
Doug Wagner, just to mention him again, he, after they took Echo private, he went on FreightWaves and was like, we're going to spend a bundle of money on software, right? We haven't been able to in the last 5 or so years, however long they were public. We need to spend $1 bazillion on technology. If I were targeting Doug Wagner, which I'm not, but if I were, I would pull up that FreightWaves article and be like, here are the problems you're probably solving, and this is the way that I can help you solve those problems. And you've already told the marketplace that you need to solve problems like this. So the internal problem you're solving is the biggest challenge, right? And so if we can show people how we're going to solve the internal, not the external problem, we get a lot closer to a closed deal.
And the messages probably get very messy when you try and have an all-encompassing message, the internal and the external. So it kind of gives you a clearer focus.
And it's hard in our space, like, because commoditization is real, especially in our world, right? And so much of it's based on relationship and who you know and how long you've worked together, et cetera. But there's always a way to, especially if you're changing, like if you're going from, let's just say, a traditional broker to like having one that has technology, or if you're going from a forwarder to a forwarder that's like trying to be a forwarder broker, like there's definitely ways to position it as like the different problems that you're solving now than you used to solve. But at the end of the day, I think you're right. Like it all comes down to humans buy from humans, and they buy internal problems.
That's great takeaway advice. I love it. And so, Kara, we just talked for.
We did.
I could keep talking about this all day. I have so many more questions, but just to start to wrap it up, you mentioned at the very beginning that one of the most exciting and challenging things about marketing is that it's ever evolving. So, if you had to provide some advice to our audience, what is your advice as a subject matter expert?
Yes. So the future of business to business marketing is going to be around intent data. It's all going to be about intent. Intent is basically your ideal customer profile, your TAM, your total addressable market, is going onto the internet and they're doing searches, right? They're looking for a solution for, I don't know, small parcel, right? I need a small parcel contract negotiation. Before someone finds you and fills out a form, they have already done 85% of their research. And it used to be all about inbound, right? HubSpot made inbound really sexy, and it's not about inbound anymore. It's all about intent. So there are two there's two sort of main intent providers in the marketplace, 6sense and Demandbase. We happen to be the first Demandbase agency partner. They are, full transparency, they are very expensive. Okay, very expensive. But if I remember back to my early days, we didn't buy Salesforce because it was too expensive, and now we're all using Salesforce or HubSpot, right?
Exactly.
The cost of these tools will come down over time. But my piece of advice for someone who's leading a supply chain company or marketing a supply chain company or going to be hiring a marketing person in supply chain is, if your leader doesn't know about intent, how to acquire it, how cheap it can be, and how to use it in your current marketing process, you should find someone who can. Because there are teams out there that are your competition today that are putting this process in place, this intent process, and they are going to be first to market. Of those less than 100 TMS turns, the TMS provider that knows the customers that are currently searching for a TMS switch are going to be first to the RFP because they have the data. And so if you're not doing it today, your competition is.
Sure.
And it's the sexiest thing to come out of Martech in a really long time.
That's really an intriguing thought, because I think of that with recruiting too. Like, you don't need us till you need us. And we can send a million emails and make a million calls, but there's going to be a day when a job seeker gets fired or quits. And today's the day where, what was the name of that recruiting firm that's all over inbox, or, I see their logo.
That's why you and I post on LinkedIn every week.
Exactly.
Stay in the inbox.
Same thing with hiring company. Like, no, we don't need a recruiter. We're good until the next person resigns, or until you grow and new roles are created. So what is your advice there? Is it to always be going after the audience that you assume has the intent, or is it to really, campus the entire audience and get your brand out there, so then you can funnel it in as people have a need for your product or service?
Yeah. So the coolest thing about intent is that you don't have to work that hard.
I'm overthinking.
So I'll go a little bit deeper in this because we're talking about it, and I think you're actually interested, which I appreciate.
I'm like taking notes.
You are, I love it. We can talk after too. So there are three types of intent data. There is the intent that lives in your CRM, so your HubSpot, your Salesforce, your Pardot, which should be farmed to identify individuals who are either looking at your blog post. This is like inbound stuff, right? Blog posts, form fills, that kind of stuff. The second is called programmatic media buying, which is you take that same list and you send ads at those humans, right? It is relatively easy. Retargeting is the easiest way to do this. So if you ever look for, like, I don't know, Paris Banks, and then like they follow you around the internet, same idea, right? So super easy to do that. The last one is called tertiary intent data, and there's two ways to do it. The first way is through a tool called Bombora. Don't buy Bombora from Bombora because it's basically free and a bunch of other tools. Our favorite is Sales Intel. We think Sales Intel is better than ZoomInfo. Their Bombora data is free. Now, Bombora is based on Google cookies. So it will go away at the end of 2023, maybe mid 2024. So it's not going to last forever, but like, use it while it's free, right?
Sure.
It's also sort of what we call the poor man's intent. It's free. It's not hyper targeted. It gives you like bigger company sort of IP address data, but not individual.
Okay.
When you get to the demand base and the six senses, they have built scraping tools over the last decade or two that tell you the interest and the interest level of actual human beings at companies in what you're selling. So think of it this way. You have a list of 1,000 key accounts, right? And you put this 1,000 key accounts into your intent tool, call it demand base, and then you load up your keywords. So supply chain hiring, hiring and supply chain, freight broker hiring, whatever it is. And then once a week, it's actually every day, but once a week, you go into demand base, and demand base resorts that list of 1,000 key accounts by the key accounts that are showing active interest.
Wow.
It's so cool.
It's frightening, but it's more convenient.
It is super creepy.
Honestly, it's more convenient. And that's kind of how I think of these Instagram ads. Like, well, thank you, Instagram, for, putting that in front of me, because I was ready to buy the product and it's triggered me. So interesting. That is something we have not tapped into, but I might be hitting you up for that.
Yeah, I mean, most people don't. And when I talked about Patrick Maley earlier and what he built at Blue Jay, that was what he built. He built it's called account-based marketing, which is really just targeted selling with a new name. But he built an intent program where he used an intent tool to identify, okay, these are the key targets that we're going after. Everyone has named accounts, right? Put your named accounts in the tool and then see who's actively interested or in a current buying cycle or in a current RFP process. Like this is the name of the game. And those companies that are early to adopt these really sexy marketing technology tools will be the first to acquire new business, because they're going to be the first one. And then the last thing is, Charlie, you got to pick up the phone, right? Like it doesn't, at the end of the day, like, you can have all this creepy marketing stuff. You can have a bunch of like alerts and like who's on the website and who's checking out what. Like you can do all kinds of like weird stuff. And now there's headless CMS. So like you can put your code on someone else's website, and we can get really techie on stuff. But most importantly is the last piece, right? Share good news, track who's interested, follow up. But if you're not literally picking up the phone and being like, hey, Charlie, I literally saw you were on my website. Can I help you? Like, that's the most important part, right? Because at the end of the day, people still buy from people, like we just talked about. But if your question is like, what's the coolest, sexiest thing happening in B2B marketing, and specifically in our space, it's intent data, hands down.
That's fascinating. And I guarantee that our listeners are going to take something away from this and be educated, but also if they're not reaching out to you, they will be Googling and buying that book off Amazon, if nothing else. So well, where can they find you, Kara? If people are interested in LeadCoverage and learning more about all your secret sauces, where should we direct them?
Well, happy to help. You can find me commenting on Charlie's LinkedIn posts usually. I'm Kara at LeadCoverage.com. You can find us on the website, and happy to help. We are the other sort of piece of the business is being extremely feminist first. Like I said before, a lot of women don't break the $1 million mark. We are trying to help as many women as we can. And then I wore my Chiefs sweatshirt on purpose today. I don't usually wear sweatshirts on podcasts, but I thought it was appropriate. So helping out corporate women too, right? Like how can we help connect you to the right people, looking for folks, looking for good resources, looking for tech, et cetera. We're happy to help.
Love it. Well, I know this is valuable to me, and I guarantee our audience is going to take a lot away. So thank you, Kara. This was a much needed conversation to educate and inform, and really appreciate your time today. And let's see what happens here.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it. It's good to be here.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.